At 2:14 on a Tuesday morning, I took a 911 call from a 64-year-old woman having a heart attack, and I kept her alive for 9 minutes, and I never once told her who I was. I've been a dispatcher for 11 years. I'm good at it. I'm good at it because nothing gets to me, and I found out that night why nothing gets to me, and I'd like to tell you the whole thing, because I still can't decide if what I did after was justice or if it was just the meanest thing I've ever done. The address on my screen was 11 minutes from my house. I'm Corinne. I'm 39. I work in a county communications center outside Tulsa, 12-hour nights, 4 on 3 off. Divorced, no kids, one dog named Rooster who is the size of a coffee table and afraid of the vacuum. That's my life. It's a small life, and it's mine, and until this year, I'd have told you it was fine. Here's the thing about my job that matters for this story. When a call comes in, the address populates on my screen before the person says a word. I know where you are before you know you've been connected. I see the phone number, the location, whether it's a landline or a cell, and if you've called us before, I can see that too. 14 seconds after your phone rings my headset, I know more about where you are than you do. So when I picked up at 2:14 and said, 911, what's the address of your emergency? I already had a house on Wren Street in Sand Springs sitting on my screen in white letters on a blue field. And then a woman's voice said, I think I'm having a heart attack. And my hands stopped. I want to explain what happened in my body, because I've replayed this 100 times, and I still don't understand the order of it. My head didn't recognize the voice. My hands did. My fingers came off that keyboard and just sat there in the air like they'd been unplugged. And I remember thinking, very clearly, in the flat voice I use for everything, what are you doing? It had been 14 years. I hadn't heard my mother's voice since 2012. Let me back up, because you need to understand my father first, and you need to understand him the way I understood him for 14 years, not the way I understand him now. My father is Doyle. He's 67. He was a lineman for the Rural Electric Co-op for 41 years, which means he spent 4 decades going up a pole in an ice storm at 3 in the morning while everybody else stayed in bed. He's got a handshake like a bench vice and a laugh you can hear from the driveway, and he has never in his life been late to anything. He is the saint of our family. That is not sarcasm, and I need you to hear it that way. When my cousin's husband walked out, my father drove to Ponca City and fixed her furnace and didn't tell anybody. When his sister Cheryl got her knee done, he moved into her spare room for 3 weeks. He is a deacon. He runs the men's breakfast. When somebody in that church dies, Doyle Haddix is in the driveway with a chainsaw before the funeral home gets there, because somebody's got to deal with that tree limb, and the widow shouldn't have to ask. Everybody loves my father, and for 14 years everybody has loved him a specific way, which is, poor Doyle, whose wife just up and left. Poor Doyle, who raised those 2 kids alone. Poor Doyle, who never said one bad word about her, not once, not ever, and isn't that something? Isn't that just the measure of a man? I need you to hold on to that last part. He never said one bad word about her. That's the whole trick. I didn't see it for 14 years, and I'm supposed to be smart. Here's what I was told, and here's what I believed from the age of 25 until 3 months ago. In the spring of 2012, my mother, Bonnie, had what the family calls her trouble. She got strange. She got paranoid. She accused my father of things. There was an incident I was never given the details of, and there was a hospital, and after that she left. Not a fight, not a scene. She was there, and then she wasn't, and she never called. Not on my birthday, not on my wedding day in 2016, which lasted 4 years and which I ruined myself, and I'll come back to that. Not when my grandmother died in 2019. 14 years of nothing at all. And my father, in that same 14 years, said one sentence about her total. He said it to me in the kitchen on Fenwick Street about a week after she went, and he said it kindly, and he was crying when he said it. He said, Corinne, if she calls you, don't engage. It feeds it. I know that's hard, but it feeds it. Don't engage. It feeds it. I want you to remember that sentence, because I built 14 years on it. So she called. Twice in 2012 that I know of, from a number I didn't recognize, and I sat there and looked at my phone and let it go, and I told myself I was being strong, And then in 2013 I changed carriers and got a new number, because that's what you did in 2013, and after that she didn't call, and I took that as confirmation. She'd gotten bored of us. She'd found something better. That's what a person who chooses to leave does. I'm going to give you 3 more things about the house on Fenwick, and I'm going to try to give them to you the way I had them, which is as nothing at all. Wallpaper, weather. 1. My father got the mail. Every day at 4:15 my whole life. My father walked out to the box at the end of the drive and got the mail and brought it in and went through it standing at the counter. That's not a suspicious thing. That's a man with a routine. He got the mail when I lived there, and he got the mail after I moved out at 22, and he got the mail for the 14 years after that. Nobody else ever touched that box. Not because we weren't allowed. Because why would you? Dad gets the mail. 2. My father writes in block capitals. 41 years of work orders will do that to a man. Everything he's ever written in his life is in these hard, square, all-caps letters, spaced out like he's got all the time in the world. Notes on the counter. Milk. Gas bill. Back by 6. Christmas tags. Boxes in the garage. If you handed me 1,000 pieces of paper, I could pick his out in about a second and a half. 3. My brother. Wade is 29 now. He was 15 inches 2012, and I was already out of the house. And so, when people say my father raised 2 kids alone, what they actually mean is he raised 1 kid alone, and I was 25 and had my own apartment and a job at a call center. But nobody says it that way. The story rounds up. It's always been he raised those kids alone, and I've been standing next to my father for 14 years while people said it, and I never corrected them either. Okay, back to 2. 14 inches the morning. I think I'm having a heart attack. 4 seconds. That's my guess. 4 seconds of me not being a dispatcher. And then 11 years of training took the wheel, because that is what training is for, and I heard my own voice come out completely level and say, "Okay, help's already coming. Stay on the line with me. How old is she?" She. I said she. She's 64 years old, and I asked her how old she was in the third person like she was somebody else's mother. Because if I'd said, "How old are you?" I'd have had to hear myself talking to her. She said, "I'm 64. I said, "Is she awake?" She said, "Honey, it's just me here." Just me here. Her breathing was wrong. Not gasping. Worse than gasping, actually. It was that wet, shallow thing at the top of the chest that we hear a lot and never like. I ran the card. That's what we call it. There's a protocol. It's on my screen, and it doesn't care who's on the other end. Is she completely alert? Is she breathing normally? Is she clammy or sweaty? Does she have any history of heart problems? Does she have aspirin in the house? She said she had a bypass in 2021 and a stent. She said she was sweating through her shirt. She said there was aspirin in the kitchen, but the kitchen was a long way off. I said, "I want you to go get it if you can do it without falling. 4 of the little orange ones. Chew them, don't swallow them whole." And I listened to my mother drag herself across a floor I've never seen in a house I've never been in, and count out 324 milligrams of aspirin, and chew it. I got her to unlock her front door. That's a thing we do. It sounds small. It is not small. If you go down behind a locked door, the crew is losing 90 seconds on that door, and 90 seconds is the whole ball game in a cardiac. I said, "Can you get to the door and unlock it, and then sit down right there where I can hear you?" And she said, "Okay, baby. Okay, baby." She calls everybody that. She always did. The mailman, the girl at the drive-thru, everybody on this earth is baby to Bonnie. It doesn't mean anything. I typed the door was unlocked into the notes so the crew would see it. My hands were doing this on their own. My hands were fine. My hands were great. At about minute 7, she went quiet. I want to tell you exactly what that's like. You say the name of the town and the street to the crew, and you say, "Advise, caller now unresponsive," and you say it in the same voice you'd use to order a sandwich, because that's the job. And at the same time, some other part of you that you keep in a box is screaming. I said, "Ma'am, stay with me, ma'am." Nothing. I said it again. "Stay with me. Talk to me, ma'am." 4 seconds. I've listened to the recording since. It's 4 seconds, and it's the longest 4 seconds of my entire life. And then she said, kind of far away, "I'm here." And I said, "Good. That's good. Keep doing that." The crew hit the door at minute 9 and change. I heard them come in. That's a sound, you know, boots and a stretcher and a man's voice going, "Ma'am, ma'am, we're going to take good care of you." And then I heard my mother say, "She's still on the phone," and then somebody picked up her phone and hung it up, which they always do, and the line went dead, and my screen went back to green. And I sat there. 22 other calls came in that shift. I took 11 of them. I don't remember one. At 4:40, I told my supervisor I needed my break, and I went out to my car in the back lot, and I sat in the driver's seat, and I could not turn the key. That's not a figure of speech. I had the key in the ignition, and I could not make my arm do the thing. Here's the part I'm not proud of. I went back inside and I pulled the incident. My incident, the one I took, which I'm allowed to look at. And I wrote the address down on a post-it and put it in my pocket, which I am not allowed to do, and which is a policy violation, and which I could be walked out for. I'd do it again. Then I went home at 7 in the morning, and I sat at my own kitchen table with my dog's head on my foot, and I looked up the address on the county assessor's website, which is free, which anybody can do, and which took about 40 seconds. Bonnie Kessler, her name before my father. Purchased 2020. 6 years. My mother has been living 6 years and 11 minutes from my house. I have driven past the end of her street. There is a Walmart on 97th that is closer to her front door than it is to mine. I called my father at 6:40 the next evening. I'd been up for 30 hours. I had it all planned out, what I was going to say, some careful thing, and then he picked up and said, "Hey, darlin'," and all of it went out of my head, and I just said it. I said, "Dad, Mom's in St. John. She had a heart attack Tuesday night." And there was a pause, and my father did not say, "Is she okay?" He did not say, "Oh my God." He did not say, "How bad?" My father said, "How did you find out?" I sat down on my kitchen floor with the phone against my ear, and my dog came over and put his chin on my knee, and I looked at a spot on the baseboard, and I understood that something enormous had just happened, and I didn't know what it was yet. I said, "Does it matter?" And he said, "Corinne, how did you find out?" A lot of you are going to say I should have known before this. Fair. I've said it to myself in the shower every day since. Here's what happened in the 11 days after that phone call, and I want to walk you through it slow, because the thing my family did in those 11 days is the reason I did what I did at the end. My Aunt Cheryl called me the next morning at 8:15. Cheryl is my father's sister. She's 70, and she has never in her life been unkind to me. She's the one who taught me to drive, and she opened with, "Sweetheart, your dad's beside himself." I said, "Aunt Cheryl, Mom had a heart attack." And Cheryl said, and I want to be precise, I wrote this down as she was saying it. "I know, and I'm sorry for her. I am. But honey, she made her choice a long time ago, and I don't want you getting pulled back into that. You didn't see what it did to him. You were grown. You were out." I said, "I was 25. She said, "Exactly. You missed the worst of it. And I want you to sit with that, because that's the machine. I was 25, so I missed it, so I don't get to have an opinion. Wade was 15, so he was too young, so he doesn't get to have one either. There is no age at which anybody in my family was ever the correct age to know what actually happened in 2012. Then my brother, Wade, came over Thursday. He's a good kid. He installs commercial flooring, he's got a girl and a truck and a bad knee, and he has been my father's shadow since he was 15 years old. He sat on my porch rail and wouldn't look at me and said, "Rinny, don't." I said, "Don't what?" "She's in a hospital." And he said, "You weren't there." I said, "Wade, you were 15. And my brother said the sentence that I now know was handed to him. The way "don't engage, it feeds it" was handed to me. He said, "I was there for the part you didn't see." And I said, "Okay, what part? Tell me. Tell me one thing. One specific thing that happened in that house in 2012. And he opened his mouth, and nothing came out. He sat on my porch rail for probably 15 seconds with his mouth open trying to produce one memory, and he couldn't, and I watched my little brother's face do something I hadn't seen since our grandmother's funeral, and then he got in his truck and left without saying goodbye. That's when I stopped being sad and started being something else. Here's the thing my father did not account for, because my father is 67 and thinks the internet is for pictures of grandbabies. Court records are public. You can walk into the Tulsa County Courthouse and go to the clerk's window and give them a name and a year, and they will bring you a file. It costs $1 a page. It is the most boring room in the world. There is a vending machine. I took a Tuesday off, and I did that. The divorce was filed in April 2012. Doyle Haddix filed it. Not her. Him. 14 years of poor Doyle, whose wife just up and left him, and the man filed the paperwork. That's not a crime. People file. I sat in that room and told myself that's not a crime. That's just a detail. That's just a thing I got wrong. Then I got to the emergency protective order. Filed the same week. Ex parte, which means she wasn't in the room. Granted the same day, which is normal. They're supposed to move fast. It barred her from the residence and from contact with the minor child, Wade Haddix, age 15. And attached to it was a psychological evaluation. I'm not going to reproduce what's in that evaluation. It says my mother was a danger. It says she had a documented history. It says specific things about specific incidents that I know now never happened, and it says them in the flat clinical language that makes anything sound true. And I sat in that room and read it, and I felt myself starting to agree with it. That's how good it is. I sat there with the actual document in my hands and I thought, well, maybe she was. Maybe Dad was right. 14 years is a long time to be trained. Then I turned the page. There's a motion in there from November 2012. Hers, her attorneys, some guy from a legal aid outfit. And then there's a hearing. And then there's an order dated the 9th of April, 2013. The order vacates everything. I had to read it 4 times because I don't speak that language. But what it says, in the end, is that the court found the evaluation had been obtained by a party who provided materially false history to the evaluator, and that the evaluator, on review, withdrew his findings, and that the protective order was dissolved and the record corrected, and that custody was restored to joint with a schedule attached. April 2013. 11 months. My mother was legally cleared 11 months after she left. Cleared by a judge, in writing, in a file anybody can read for $1 a page. And in April 2013, my brother was 16, and he wouldn't see her, because he'd had a year of my father, and I was 26, and had a new phone number and a sentence in my head that said, "Don't engage, it feeds it." The order didn't matter. He'd already won. He didn't need the law. He had us. That's what I understood in the clerk's office with a vending machine humming behind me, and I want to be honest that I did not cry. I went out to the parking garage, and I put my forehead on the steering wheel, and I was completely dry-eyed, and I thought, she's 11 minutes away. She's been 11 minutes away for 6 years. Why didn't she ever knock on my door? I want to tell you about the room, because everything is different on the other side of it. I went back to St. John on a Sunday, 4th floor, cardiac. I had been in that hospital 11 days earlier and had not gone up, and I'd like to skip over that, but I won't. I went, and I sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes and drove home. A nurse asked me at the elevator if I was family, and I said no. I said the word no out loud, with my mouth, about my own mother, and then I got back in my car. That's mine. Nobody made me do that. That one's mine. So Sunday I went back and I did go up, and I stood in a doorway, and there was a woman in that bed with an oxygen cannula and gray roots and my exact hands. I don't look like my mother. I look like Doyle. That's the family joke. That's been the joke my whole life. But her hands were my hands. Same short fingers, same crooked pinky, the one my ex used to call the hitchhiker. I said, "Mom?" And she opened her eyes and looked at me, and she didn't say Corinne. She didn't say, "Oh my God." She didn't cry. She said, "You're real." I said, "What?" And she said, I thought and stopped and started over, and she said, "The girl on the phone. That was you." I hadn't said a word about the phone. Not one word. I'd never told anybody at that point. Not Wade, not Cheryl, nobody. I said, "How?" And my mother said, "Baby, I'd know your voice in a coal mine." And then she started crying, and I stood in that doorway like a piece of furniture. Here's what she said. I'm going to give it to you the way it came, because it came sideways and slow in about 90 minutes, with a nurse coming in twice, and because the important thing wasn't in the middle, it was the first thing. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, and she looked at me and she asked the question she'd apparently been carrying for 14 years, and she asked it like she already knew the answer and wanted it anyway. She said, "Did you get the letters, baby? Any of them?" I said, "What letters?" And my mother's face. I'm never going to be able to describe my mother's face. Something went out of it and something came into it at the same time. She looked at the ceiling for a while. And then she said, in this small voice, like she was doing arithmetic, "Oh, just oh." She wrote to me every 2 weeks. For 8 years. She didn't have my address. She never had my address. I moved out at 22. I moved 4 times in 6 years. And by 2012, the only address on this planet my mother had for me was the house on Fenwick Street. So that's where she sent them. Corinne Haddix, care of, and my father's address, in her handwriting, every 2 weeks, from 2012 to 2020. And she wrote to Wade at the same house, because Wade lived there. And every single one came back. Not moved, no forwarding. Not the yellow sticker, came back marked. Return to sender. She said, I stopped in 2020. I'm not proud of that. 200 and something, and I decided you'd told me what you had to tell me. 200 times. And I said, Mom, who wrote on the envelopes? And she said, well, you did, honey. Her house key was under a ceramic turtle by the step. She told me that from the hospital bed, like she'd been waiting a long time to be able to tell somebody where her key was. It's a small house. It's very clean. There's a recliner and a TV and a picture of me and Wade on the wall from 2009 that I have never seen a copy of, and I don't know where she got it, and I couldn't ask because I couldn't breathe. The box is in the closet. It's a copy paper box. It's not hidden. It's just in the closet where you'd keep a box. 213 envelopes. Everyone addressed in my mother's handwriting, that loopy, leaning, school teacher-ish cursive that I would also know in a coal mine. Corinne Haddix, Wade Haddix, care of 1,104 Fenwick. And across every single one, in the top left corner, in hard square all capital letters, spaced out like the man had all the time in the world. Return to sender, not at this address. 213 times. In my father's handwriting. Milk, gas bill, back by 6, return to sender. He walked to that box at 4:15 every day for 8 years, and roughly 26 times a year he found one, and he wrote on it, and he walked it back out to the box, and then he came inside and made dinner, and asked me how my shift was. I sat down on my mother's closet floor with my back against the wall. Here's the part that took the last of it out of me. Under the 213 there's another stack. 41 of them, sealed, stamped, never mailed. Because she'd given up, but she hadn't been able to stop, so she kept writing them and putting them in the box, and they've got no address on them at all, just Corinne on the front. That's it. One word, because she didn't know where to send them anymore. The most recent one is dated 3 weeks before the heart attack. And there's one from March of last year, and I opened that one first because I recognized nothing about it, and it says, and I'm going to type this, and then I'm going to go do something else for a while. I saw you at the Walmart on 97th. You were buying dog food, the big bag, so I guess he's a big one. You looked good, baby. You looked tired, but you looked good. I didn't say anything. I hope that was right. I've been trying to figure out for 4 years what's right. She saw me. She stood in a Walmart and watched her daughter buy dog food, and she didn't say anything because she thought I'd sent 213 letters back to her. I want to tell you what I did, and then I want you to tell me if I'm a monster. I did not go to my father's house. I didn't call him. I didn't stand up at anything or scream at anybody or slide a folder across a table. I went to the Kinko's on Memorial, and I made copies. 19 packets. Each one had 2 pieces of paper in it. Page 1 was a photocopy of one envelope front only, so you could see her cursive and his block capitals in the same frame, with a postmark on it. Page 2 was the first last page of the April 2013 order, the one that vacates, the one with the words materially false history in it, and a judge's signature, and a date. No note, nothing else. I didn't write a single word. And then I went to the post office and I mailed them. Aunt Cheryl, my 4 cousins, my father's pastor, his best friend Sonny, who's been in the bowling league with him since 1994, 2 guys from the old co-op crew, the woman who runs the men's breakfast, the neighbors on both sides of Fenwick who've watched him get the mail at 4:15 for 30 years. Nineten. I did not mail one to my father. That was deliberate, and it's the part I want your verdict on. I could have. I thought about it for a long time in that parking lot. And I decided that my father spent 14 years making sure that the truth about his family reached everybody except the people it belonged to, and that he could find out from Cheryl. The man owned the mailbox for 14 years. I mailed him back. It took 9 days. Cheryl called me first, and she couldn't get a sentence out. 70 years old, and she just made a sound and hung up and called back 4 minutes later. She said, "That's Doyle's writing." I said, "Yes." She said, "Corinne, that's Doyle's writing on it." She said it maybe 6 times, not asking, just saying it, over and over, like if she said it enough it would turn into something else. And this is the woman who told me 11 days earlier that my mother made her choice, and I want to be fair to Cheryl, and also I don't want to be, so I'll just tell you what she did next. She got in her car and drove to St. John and sat with my mother for 2 hours, and then she drove to Fenwick Street, and I don't know what happened there, and neither of them will tell me. Sonny quit the league. 52 years of friendship and he just stopped going. Didn't say why. Everybody knows why. The church thing I only heard about secondhand. My father stepped back from the deacon board in February. The word they used was personal reasons. He still goes. He sits in the back now and leaves before the last song, which, if you knew my father has sat in the same pew since 1996 and shaken every hand on the way out for 30 years. He called me once, 9 days after the envelopes went out. I let it ring twice, and then I picked up because I wanted to hear it. He didn't deny anything. That's the thing. I had this whole scenario in my head where he'd say it was a mistake, or the post office did it or something, and he didn't even try. He knew I had the order. He knew I'd been to the courthouse. He'd known since the phone call in October, and that's why the first thing out of his mouth that night was, "How did you find out?" Because that's a man checking a fence line. He said, "I'm not going to apologize." I said, "Okay." He said, "You want me to be sorry? I'm not sorry. You had a good childhood. You had a father who was there every night of your life. You had Christmas. You had a house that was quiet. I gave you that." I said, "You gave me a mother who thought I sent her letters back." And my father said, "You were happy, Corinne. 14 years, you were happy. Are you happier now?" That's it. That's the whole argument. He's been building it for 14 years, and that's what it is. And the worst part, the actual worst part, the part I chew on at 4 in the morning, is that it's not nothing. It's not nothing. I have to sit here and admit that a version of me who never took that call is asleep right now, and I'm not. I said, "Dad, what happened in 2012? Just say it. Nobody's recording. What did she do?" And there was a long pause, long enough that I thought the call dropped. And my father said, "She was going to take him. Him, Wade. Not she was sick, not she was dangerous. She was going to take him, and my father was 53 years old, and a judge was going to give a 15-year-old boy to his mother, and so my father sat down with a phone number and a story and got an evaluator to write him a different outcome. It was never protection. It was never even hate. He just wasn't going to lose. He hung up. We haven't spoken since. That was in February. Wade came over in March. He didn't get one of the 19. I didn't send my brother a photocopy. I don't know why. I think because I wanted to hand it to him, or I wanted him to ask, or I was being cruel. I honestly don't know. Cheryl told him. Of course she did. He showed up on a Saturday and stood in my driveway and wouldn't come in, and he said, "Show me." So I got the box out of my trunk. I'd been driving around with it for a month like a lunatic, and I set it on the tailgate of his truck in my driveway, and I said, "The ones on top are yours," because that's what I hadn't told anybody yet. 61 of those 213 are addressed to Wade Haddix, age 15, age 16, age 17. His mother wrote him 61 letters, and his father wrote "return to sender" on every one of them, and then drove that kid to football practice. My brother stood in my driveway and went through them one at a time, and he didn't open any of them. He just looked at the front of each one and set it down, 61 times. And then he said the thing that I think about more than anything my father said. He said, he used to make me come with him to get the mail. He said, I'd be doing homework and he'd go, "Come walk out with me," every day. And I thought it was, I don't know what I thought it was. I thought he liked me, 15 years old. Walked to the mailbox with his father every day for the exclusive purpose of being where his father could see him when the letters showed up. Wade sat down on his own tailgate and put his hands over his face and I put my hand on my brother's back, and that's the first time I'd touched him since our grandmother died in 2019. He drove to Sand Springs that night. He's been there 11 times since. He's better at it than I am. He can just sit in her kitchen and talk about flooring for 2 hours and let it be easy, and I can't do that. I sit in there like I'm being interviewed. He hasn't spoken to Doyle since March either. So that's 2 out of 2, and that's the whole scoreboard, and I don't feel one thing about it that I expected to feel. Where it all landed. My mother's alive. That's the headline. Stent, cardiac rehab, a fistful of pills, and an ejection fraction that her cardiologist describes with the word okay, which he says in a way I don't love. She's 64, and she's got real damage, and she gets tired going up the 3 steps to my porch. That's permanent. I'm not going to sell you a miracle. There's no lawsuit. There's nobody to sue. My father didn't steal any money, that's the strange thing. There's no dollar amount anywhere in this. He committed one fraud on one evaluator in 2012, and the statute on that ran out before I was 30, and the rest of it, the 14 years of it, is just a man writing 4 words on an envelope. That's not illegal. You can do that. You can do that 213 times, and no one on this earth can touch you. The only justice that exists in this story is 19 envelopes and the faces of the people who opened them. Is that enough? I don't know. I sat in that clerk's office wanting handcuffs, and what I got was a man leaving church before the last song. My mother and me, honestly, is hard. Everybody wants that to be the beautiful part, and it's the hardest part. There's a woman in Sand Springs who has known me since I was born, and doesn't know me at all. She doesn't know I'm divorced. She didn't know I was married. She has 14 years of questions, and she asks them so carefully, one per visit, like she's rationing. And that carefulness is the thing that guts me. My mother is scared of using up her turns. And here's the last thing, and this is what I actually need you for. I requested the recording. You can do that in this state. They're records. It took 6 weeks, and a form, and $11. I've got 9 minutes and 41 seconds of a Tuesday morning on my phone. My mother saying she's having a heart attack. Me telling her to chew 4 aspirin. Her going quiet at minute 7. And my voice, this steady, warm, completely calm voice, the voice I built out of 14 years of not feeling anything, saying, "Stay with me. Talk to me, Mom." She knew it was me. She said so, in the hospital, in the first 4 seconds. She'd know my voice in a coal mine, but she doesn't know what's on it. She doesn't know that her daughter, who she thought sent 213 letters back to her, spent 9 minutes and 41 seconds keeping her alive without ever once saying her name. She asked me last week what happened that night. She said the paramedics told her the dispatcher was really good. So, was I wrong to mail those 19 envelopes instead of saying it to my father's face? Cheryl thinks I ambushed people. Maybe she's right. And be honest with me about this one, because I can't get anywhere with it. My father asked if I'm happier now, and I've been trying to answer him for 4 months. 14 good years bought with that. Is he wrong? And Wade was 15. And walked to that mailbox every single day. Is my brother a victim? Or did he choose? Or is there some third thing I don't have a word for? But the one I actually can't sleep on is the last one. She doesn't know it was 9 minutes. She doesn't know I said stay with me. I have the file on my phone. It's 41 seconds under 10 minutes, and I've listened to it 11 times, and I haven't been able to make myself do anything with it. Do I play it for her?